Back to Self-Society. Today is October 31st, 2024. We are only 5 days away from the 2024 U.S. presidential election. So this is the 10th projection we'll be making using a model outside of polling to project or predict who we believe will win the presidential election between Harris and Trump. Now, if you've been following me on this channel, you know already the model we're using. But despite that, I've updated some of the parameters and data. So let's, for the new folks coming onto the channel, go over the data sets we'll be using or that we've used to calculate each of the various states. First off, we're using the website NBC Decision 2024 to determine what votes have been cast thus far. You can see here so far there have been around 62 million votes, mail-in, early in-person votes cast nationally. Of those, 41% coming from Democrats and 40% from Republicans, and the remaining 19% from independent or other. So we go into each of the states to tabulate the total votes cast in that state. For example, in Georgia, you see 3.6 million plus votes have been cast thus far. Over here on the left side, you see our spreadsheet. So I go into Georgia, and over here in the pink, I put in the number of votes that state has so far cast. And you can also see to the side, 71.99% is the total that have shown up to vote compared to the overall number that have voted in 2024. So that's a record turnout. Already 72% of all votes cast in the 2020 election. And so I fill in those numbers for each of the states. And off to the left, you can see that we have categories for Dem, GOP, and Independent. So I put them according to what shows up here on NBC's news website. You can see 45% for Dem, 48% for GOP, and 7% for other. And so going back to Georgia, I've filled in the appropriate 45%. That comes up with a total of 1.6 million of those 3 million votes. 48% for GOP, 1.7 million plus for the total 3.6 million votes. And finally, 7% come out to 250,000 votes of that 3.6 million votes. And I've done that for each one of the states up to now. And this has been updated as of 6 p.m. on the 31st of October. Now, just top of that, you can see that the states are listed again. All the data you're seeing here is the votes as they were cast in each of the battleground states I've listed: Texas, Florida, Iowa, Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, as they've been cast in the 2020 presidential election. For example, in the state of Texas, 11.1 million votes were cast, of which 5.4 were voted by GOP and 4.3 from Dem, and then about 1.3 coming from Independent. Actually, yes. And what we have here in the middle section here, you can see this 5.8 is that the number of registered Democrats in the state of Texas, and number of GOP, number of independents. And so that tells you that 63% of Dems showed up in Texas in 2020, 75% of GOP showed up, and then 63% of independents showed up. And we used that data to determine what percentage have showed up thus far in the 2024 election compared to 2020. For example, in Texas, among all registered voters, 40.6% have showed up thus far, compared to 60.4% of all registrants in the state of Texas in 2020. So you can compare each of these states to see how far along those states are coming compared to the total vote of 2020. Now, right below that, I then calculated percentage of the 2020 vote. For example, that 2.7 million Dem votes in Texas thus far is 64% of the vote of 2020, thus far showing up in Texas that are Democrats. That means the remaining 36% is yet to vote, and I'm projecting they'll vote on the same day. In intermodal, we're projecting, or we're imagining, that the vote is being held tomorrow. So this is if the election were held tomorrow. 36% additional votes would be coming out for Dems to vote in the state of Texas. That is the assumption we're making. And we take that 36%, create a multiplier by dividing 36 by 54, or 64%, and then multiply that by the total number of votes, and this is how many votes were projected additional. Add those two together, and we get a total projected vote in the state of Texas coming from Dems. We've done that for GOP and also for Independent, added them all together, and we come up with the total number of votes expected in the state of Texas if the election were held tomorrow. You can see in the state of Texas we are projecting 8.4 million votes compared to 2020's 11.1 million votes in the state of Texas. Of course, we're 5 days out, and that tells us we're right on track. Matter of fact, we're a little bit behind in the state of Texas. If you go down to this last set of data all the way to the right, 87% of the vote is what's expected. And in some of these states, we're actually ahead. For example, in the state of North Carolina, the record voting of 21% already of the total vote showing up in 2020. So forth and so on. And so also in Georgia, it's already 90%. And Arizona, these are record turnouts, also in Florida, so forth and so on. So that's what we've got. Now, we take all of that and we add up the numbers and we come up with the total number that we're expecting in that state. For example, in Texas, 4.3 million for Dems, 5.4 for GOP, and 1.3 for Independents. Now, the other assumption we're making is that all Dems will vote for Harris and all GOP will vote for Trump. And then we split up the Independent based upon how they looked. We're modeling after where they went in each of the states in 2020. And I'm taking that from the CNN website Politics. For example, if you go to the state of Texas, we scroll down to the section that says Party ID, you can see that 96% of Democrats voted for Biden, whereas 4% of Democrats voted for Trump. And so here I have put that in, 96% in the state of Texas, Dems voted for Biden and 4% for Trump. We've also included 94% Republicans voting for Trump over here and 4% voting for, 4% voting for Trump. Or rather than, yes, that's correct, 4% of Dems voting for Trump, and that's where you get the 4% here. And the 5% of the GOP voting for Biden. So you put that in here. And then we multiply that by the number of total independent votes that have been cast, and we get a total. And also we're counting what percentage of independents in that state. You can see 51% of independents in 2020 voted for Biden in the state of Texas, or 45% voted for Donald Trump. And so we put those in accordingly, 51% for Biden, for Harris, and 45% for Donald Trump. So we're assuming a couple things. One, that what happened in 2020 is basically what's going to happen in 2024, except the only difference is how the votes are showing up thus far in 2024. And that gives us a trend line that we're superimposing onto the way things happened in 2020. All right, now, the other thing this is actually looking at what actually happened. We're not even looking at polling at all. We're basing it on actual data, actual what happened and what is happening. Now, hopefully that all makes sense. If you're not clear on that, feel free to let me know, and I can try to clarify it further in the remaining videos coming up over the next 4 to 5 days. So here's our map, so let's go ahead and get started. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and black this out so we don't distract ourselves from each of the states that we're focusing in on. In the state of Texas, we're expecting about 4.5 million votes to go toward Harris and 5.2 million to go toward Donald Trump. That's a 700,000, that's 800,000 spread. So 54% of the vote compared to 46% of the vote. So Trump is doing quite well in that state, and we've already factored in all the independent votes and the way things are going back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. And that means that Trump is on track to get the state of Texas. So we're at 226 Harris and 189 Donald Trump. Let's move on to our next state in the lineup, and that is the state of Florida. And I'm doing this based upon the chronology of these states, on which states I think will likely go to Trump, and then less likely to go to Trump as you go further into the video. Now, in the state of Florida, that's actually going to be an upset if things are continuing at the current trend, with roughly 54% of independents voting for Dem, 43% of independents voting for Trump. That's if things basically happen this time around the way they happened in 2020. And 7% of GOP will vote for Harris, and 93% will vote for Trump. 5% of Dems will vote for Trump, and 94% will vote for Harris. Okay, so after it's all said and done, it looks like Harris is barely on track to take this is a surprise victory in the state of Florida, bringing her to 256 compared to Donald Trump's 184. And a lot of this has to do with that in the state of Florida, so far, 42% of Dems have showed up to vote. And you can see that is also true for Republicans. But the difference here is the number of independents are showing up. An impressive 66% more independents are showing up already compared to what showed up in 2020. And you can see that the difference here is a good 11% more independents voting for Harris than Donald Trump. That's if she performs as Biden will. Now, when I'm finished with this, I'm going to kind of change some of these numbers so that Harris performs a little bit more weakly than did Biden, because I think that's going to be a little bit more realistic. But let's go through this exercise. Presuming Harris performs as well as Biden, and the numbers of votes we've got in so far match, then Harris looks to take the state of Florida. Moving on to our next state, Iowa. Now, last night, before we got a new batch of votes, it looked like Harris is on track to take the state of Iowa using this model. But this time, with the new batch of votes, it looks like Trump is expecting to pick up 51.4% of the votes compared to Harris's 48.6% of the votes. And that's only about 3% spread, which is quite small. Typically, it's around anywhere from 5 to 7% spread in the state of Iowa. But Iowa's going to go to Donald Trump. And sorry, I forgot to grade this out, but nonetheless, 6 of those electoral, 189 for Trump, 256 for Harris. Moving on to our next state in the lineup, and that's the state of Georgia. In the state of Georgia, we're anticipating 51.5% of the vote will go to Trump, and 48.5% will go to Harris. That's a 3% spread. Trump comfortably picking up the state of Georgia, 205 to 256. Now, as to why that occurred, I think some of the African American and Hispanic population in Georgia moved over to Trump, and the white population didn't budge that much. At least that's the way it stands as of today. Now, things may change, but so far in the state of Georgia, roughly 48% of all registered votes have voted in that state. So that's quite impressive. Already 90% compared to what showed up in all of 2020 have showed up in Georgia in 2024. That's a record early vote count, by the way. All right, moving on to our next state in the lineup, and that's the state of Arizona. And in that state, very contentious state, Harris barely pulls out by 0.2%. So obviously that's so close that that clearly will likely or possibly change before the election is over. So at this time, Harris is barely getting the state of Arizona, bringing her to 267 to 205 Trump. She's only 3 shy of becoming the next president and first female president of the United States. All right, moving on to our next state, and that is, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the state of North Carolina. And in that state, right now, using our model, it's only 0.4% difference, 50.2% for Harris, 49.8% for Trump. And here's another reason why I think that this model is very likely to be very accurate, because it not only reflects the way things were in 2020, and not much has changed, other than it's probably a little bit closer than it was in a number of the states, like Georgia, for example, and other states a little less, and sort of balancing out across the board. But also, I don't think people have really moved or shifted that much. People are very staunchly in one camp or the other over the past 4 years. And at this time, it looks like she's going to take North Carolina, but barely. And in this case, that would make her the next president of the United States with 283 to Trump's 205. So let's go ahead and finish off this exercise. In the next state of Nevada, we're anticipating that 51.7% will go over to Harris and 48.3% will go over to Donald Trump, giving Harris that 6 electoral votes, bringing her to a comfortable 289 to 205 lead. Moving on to the next state in the lineup, and that is moving to the Midwest. The first of those states is Wisconsin. And in that state, although currently Kamala Harris is ahead in that state with roughly 428,000 votes compared to Trump's 293,000 votes, quite substantially, 35 compared to 24%. Trump is on track to win the state of Wisconsin very comfortably, 44.1% compared to Trump's 55.9%, giving him Wisconsin. Now that's a change from yesterday because a new batch of votes came in that really moved the numbers from 21% to 24% in favor of GOP overnight. And then we're down to the 2 remaining states, that is Michigan, where we're anticipating roughly 50.7% compared to 49.3%. That's a 1.4% difference, matching what happened in 2020, but actually a little bit weaker in favor of Harris, bringing it to 304 compared to Trump's 215. Bringing us to the last state, Pennsylvania. Using our model, we're expecting Harris to pick up 50.8% compared to Trump's 49.2%, a difference of 1.6%. Again, quite close. So if we give Harris those 19 electoral college votes, then she's at 323 compared to Trump's 215. Not quite a blowout, but a very strong showing. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just assume that each of these states are roughly 2% less. In other words, I'm going to give Harris 2% less of the independent vote and give those 2 additional percentage votes over to Trump. Because I'm presuming, again, she's going to possibly fare a little bit weakly, a little bit more, have a weaker showing than Biden. So let's go ahead and put those numbers in. So here would be at 0.49. Here would be at 0.52 in Iowa, 0.48 in Georgia, 0.51 in Arizona, 0.51. I believe that was, let me take a look here. Yes, 0.51, 0.48 in North Carolina, 0.48 in Nevada, 0.52 in Wisconsin, 0.49 in Michigan, 0.5 in the state of Pennsylvania. And then I'm going to give those the advantage of that 2% of independence over to Trump in each of these states. And we see here We're going to put in each of these numbers and we'll see how things pan out. Now, I'm not going to change the votes going between GOP and Dem, because you can see that 0.6% of GOP goes, on average, is going to Dem, and 0.5% from GOP, or rather from Dem to Donald Trump. So that's a difference of 1% of the vote. And though that may make a difference, I think not much. So I'm not going to change this. I'm going to keep it where it is. But using this, we can see that still Harris would pick up Florida, Trump pick up Texas, Iowa, he would pick up Georgia, and instead of Harris getting Arizona, it would go to Trump. And instead of Harris taking North Carolina, it would go to Trump. But Nevada stays with Harris, Wisconsin gets more in Trump's favor, and Michigan and Pennsylvania stay with Harris. So let's change Arizona, give it to Trump, and let's give the other state, what was it, North Carolina, over to Donald Trump as well. So in this case, it'd be 296 to 242. Now, let's also presume that we're going to say that Harris performs even more poorly among the independent, and she even gets less. So let's give it 2 less across the board. So 0.47 here, 0.5, 0.46, 0.49, 0.49, 0.46, 0.46, 0.50, 0.47, and 0.48. And even with that, she still takes Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Florida. She does, however, no, that's it. So she keeps those states. But if I give that advantage to Donald Trump, an additional 2% to Donald Trump, which is, again, I'm being quite generous. I'm saying that Trump is performing substantially better, and Harris is performing quite a bit poorer among independents than did Biden. And with that, you can see that Harris keeps Michigan, Pennsylvania, and she still keeps Florida. The only state that, I guess Donald Trump picks up Nevada. So then it brings it to 248 to 290. So that's where it stands. Let me know what you think. Do you disagree with any part of the model? Why or why not? Give me plenty of reasons. I am open to suggestions. And if there are more set of data coming in tomorrow, then we'll have another video, another projection up. Good day.